have a couple of important announcements from Renegade University. First of all, December 1st, we begin the next edition of Make Your Own Guns, 3D Printing, and the Glock 17. This is a re-up of our previous Make Your Own Guns course, which sold out. So you better go to renegadeuniversity.com/guns and enroll right now if you're interested, because we had to cap the first course and we might have to do that this time as well. So again, go to renegadeuniversity.com/guns to sign up for Make Your Own Guns, 3D Printing, and the Glock 17. Also, you should, if you are a fan of this show, go to patreon.com/unregistered and become a member of the Unregistered Underground for a very low monthly price. And for that, you get bonus episodes featuring the likes of Hotep Jesus, Michael Malice, and others. You get special AMAs where you get to ask the questions. And also, we have our new show, Unreported with Landry Harmon, in which I react to videos of the news. So again, go to patreon.com/unregistered to become a member of the brand new Unregistered Underground Supporting Listeners group. Thank you. Let's start the show. Thank you to Headspace, the mindfulness meditation app that changed my life, for sponsoring Unregistered. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. What if anti-racism actually serves the interests of the most powerful people in our society? This is my interview with Batya Ungar-Sargon. I'm in New York, but I am joined also from New York by the journalist Batya Ungar-Sargon. Did I pronounce your name right?
You totally pronounced my name right. Thank you so much for having me. I have to say, my only reservation about being here is this. So you're known as the man who interviews the heterodox and the people who have others would silence. And I don't identify with that at all. I feel like the ideas in my book are so obvious as to be almost embarrassing to have to write down. So I feel like what I'm saying is like totally obvious and totally like, who could take issue with any of these ideas?
It's just obviously true. Every great philosopher said.
No, it's not that. It's that it's like anybody who's not in the elite bubble immediately know, everybody knows this is true. Everyone who's not an elite journalist knows that journalism has become a profession of elites that is only about elite issues and defends the economic interests of the elites. That's you get out of New York, you get out of Washington, everybody knows this.
Yes.
So it's I'm a little embarrassed to be put in the ranks of all of your other illustrious, heterodox, canceled people.
Well, Batya, you will soon find out that you are among us. You are one of us. You will have no choice in the matter because you will be placed in that category by people with more power than you or I. Sorry. Welcome to the outcasts. Welcome to the fringes, the margins, the non-respectable. Okay. All right. Yeah. For people who do not read the New York Times from their Manhattan apartments, for people who don't listen to NPR all day long from their San Francisco mansions, you are suggesting here that the people who are not those people, they know what your book says. They
Yeah.
know that. And the main
Yeah.
argument, I suppose there's many arguments in your book, but I guess the overarching argument is that the media, as you just said, the media now is of the mainstream media is of, by, and for the ruling class, the economic elite of this country, who also have made themselves into the cultural elite by way of their economic power. So you're saying that the people who don't live in Manhattan and San Francisco and don't read the New York Times and NPR, they know that? All the people in flyover country? Really?
Of course they know that.
Like Americans, you mean? Like regular, ordinary Americans, the people that we study but never actually see or talk to? Those people? They know this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because I have been telling everyone for like a year now that I watch Steve Bannon's War Room every day.
Uh-huh.
This is my thing. And I'm fascinated by it for many reasons. But one of the things is that you're right. They talk about the mainstream media exactly, sorry to tell you this, exactly the way that you do. The Trump, MAGA, those evil Nazi people, they talk about the mainstream media the same way as my nice Jewish friend Batya talks about the media. Does that trouble you at all? I mean, yes, you're right. They do see it as, they see the New York Times as an organ of the ruling class, and they want to overthrow it. But
so you're really working to get me canceled here, right off.
Yeah,
right
no,
off
I want you to join the club fast. We need help.
Ungar-Sargon agrees with Steve Bannon. The reason that Steve Bannon knows this is because Trump's base was people without a college education. And my book is about the class chasm in America. And it wasn't, of course, yes, at some point, the rich Republicans got on the Trump train, right? Like that, of course, did happen.
Right.
But Trump got, I think, 67% of white Americans without a college degree. He got a lot of minority votes as well. And those minority votes were overwhelmingly from the working class as well. So, of course, a book that's arguing that the elite media has abandoned the working class, like people who are catering to those people and listening to their grievances, which are real, which were caused by Democrats' economic agendas, for the last 30, 40 years, they're going to agree with me and they're going to see it. And it's so funny. I just want to make this point, which is like, a lot of times, like other lefties will try to insult me and be like, these are conservative right-wing talking points. And it's like, the word conservative is not a slur. You know what I mean? It's a description of a legitimate point of view. I'm not insulted by being called that. I'm not a conservative. I'm a quasi-socialist.
Yeah.
But, if you want to call me a conservative, I'm not going to be insulted by that. Like that's not actually an insult. It's just a description of people you don't like if you're part of a liberal elite. And like, you can't cede to people the right to insult you by calling you things that are like totally legitimate and respectable. I mean, happens to be, I see myself as, I believe that our entire agenda should be focused on the working class and the downwardly middle class. Like, I don't think that is like consistent with conservatism, although working class Americans do happen to be more conservative, irrespective of who they vote for. And so from that point of view, I feel that it is extremely important that we respect conservatives and respect conservatism. But it's so funny how that's become like a slur, or like, AOC the other day saying only old people use the word woke. It's like being old is not an insult. I'm sorry. Like if your whole way of evaluating whether a proposition is true or not is to be like, do conservatives believe it? Do old people believe it? Like, I'm sorry, that's not a serious way of evaluating things, but it's so the way of the liberal media. I'm sorry, my cat showed up. She's, I can't have no control over her. She rules the roost here. I just don't think that's such a college, like a college way of saying that. Oh, you're old. Okay, boomer. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, is that really what it's come to?
Yeah, it's a pretty weak ad hominem argument, I would say. You're wrong because you're old. An especially weak one. All right, listen, what's the argument of the book? The argument of the book, the overarching one, is that the mainstream media is controlled by the economic ruling class. Now, that's nothing new, though, Batya. Come on. I mean, the wealthy have always owned and operated the newspapers and the TV stations and the radio stations for the most part, right? Overwhelmingly. But we'll get back to that in a second. But there's many other sub theses within the book. And so you say that, and I agree with you that your book is really a socialist argument. It's a left-wing argument. It's a left-wing socialist.
Left-wing argument. I'm not, the reason I hesitate to fully embrace, I say I'm a socialist, but what I mean by that is not what today's socialists mean by it. I'm not pro expanding the welfare state. It's okay. Because to me, that is not actually a pro working class agenda. And what I mean by that is that, you know, in America, we have what looks like a robust debate about economic policy, but really isn't. You have the right wing, which is pushing, you know, the trickle down nonsense, right? We all know that that doesn't work. That's sort of led us here, right? Like the idea that you can just expect the market to somehow provide for the people at the bottom, right? Like we've all seen that graph of, you know, productivity versus wages just diverging in this disgusting way, right? That's terrible. And that's what the entire Republican Party, apart from, you know, Josh Hawley and Marco Rubio, is advocating. And then you have the Democrats who are advocating an expanded welfare state. But that too is not a pro-working class agenda if you think about it. You know, the working class, they don't want welfare. They don't want a universal basic income. They don't want to be paid to not work. You know what I mean? They don't want to be like paid off for not having a job. A job is where you get self-esteem from. It's where you get dignity from. You are not an active participant in building up this nation if you don't have a job, if you're not a person who is working towards that. And an expanded welfare state is essentially a way of paying people off for not giving them dignified labor. And it's just not, when you just talk to working class people, that's not what they want. They want autonomy. And so I feel like we have what looks like this debate that's actually a debate about the elites, because of course the liberal elites are happy to pay, you know, higher taxes because they've accumulated so much at this point, you know, and essentially to me, it's like, that's a hostile to the working class point of view to expect them to live like at the beneficence of liberal elites who, you know, who are continuing to accumulate more and more.
Right. Well, I would say that among the American working class, that welfare is, in fact, not very popular, but it is quite popular. Exactly. Among the European and Australian working classes and others.
But America is better. We are better. We are the greatest nation in the world.
I mean, I would love to get a bunch of money in the mail, you know, every month for doing nothing. I mean, I'm all for that, but I don't think that's really possible. So back to your book and the main argument in it, and we haven't even really addressed it. The main argument is about race. It's about race, right?
Well, the main argument is that what looks like a conversation about race is actually about class.
Yes, exactly. Yes. But it's about the in Marxist terms would be the epiphenomenon of race that you're tackling, and you're identifying it as not the real phenomenon. The real phenomenon has to do with class dynamics and class conflict.
Exactly. I argue that you know, an elite media is using a moral panic around race at a time when Americans have never been more united around the evil of racism in order to distract from the disgusting income inequality that liberal elites are very much benefiting from right now at the expense of the working class. I will just disagree with one thing that you said, which is that you said that, you know, the media has always been about the elites. It's always been for the elites. So in the book, the book begins with a populist history of American journalism. And I think that actually our journalism was not by and for elites for much of its glory days, starting in 1833 with the penny press, which was really for the poor and the working classes. It was really only around the 1970s when you started to see the wholesale abandonment of the working class by all of the media that was targeting the liberal sector of America. And what it did was it opened up this huge lane for someone like Rupert Murdoch to just show up and clean up, you know? So, you know, liberals love to complain about Fox News is, you know, hypnotizing my parents, eating their brains, whatever. But the truth is Fox News is it's not turning working class Americans conservative. It's conservative because it's catering to the working class. That's the argument that I make. Obviously not from an economic point of view, but at least it doesn't insult their values while abandoning them economically like we do.
the first couple, I think it's 2 chapters that you do the history, right? In the book. And when you talk about, and it's essential context for this. So you talk about the rise of the penny press of the 19th century and early 20th century, which was, now those papers were owned by the wealthy, though. That was my point, right? It was Pulitzer.
They got wealthy, Thad, off of making something that poor people wanted enough to give them their money. So it wasn't, I would say so Benjamin Day only owned the Sun for 5 years. Like he was a businessman, right? He created a business, but I think both he and Pulitzer was homeless when he first started being a journalist. I mean, he came from nothing, and he did get very rich, but they got rich off of realizing that there are so many working class people, and that you confer a dignity on somebody when you say to them, you may only have 2 pennies, but I have something that's worth one of them, by turning them into customers, into consumers. And they made the working class unignorable by turning them into a class, essentially, with class consciousness. But they weren't doing it in this way that like liberals today do, like looking down upon, you know what I mean? All liberal advocacy today is done by people who have these very elite college educations, who simply could not imagine, a person being satisfied with a factory job. Like they cannot imagine getting dignity out of a job that actually requires the solidarity of numbers to get power from it. We are all drunk on the meritocracy, which gives us this sense that, our success is earned from our talents and our intelligence. And indeed, we are all very intelligent and we are all very talented. But, the fact that the economy works so well for knowledge age jobs and so poorly for the working class, it has created this false sense of, what a dignified life looks for, at the same time as really taking, like you said, all cultural power and huge, huge amounts of political power and really, really funneling it to the top 10% at the expense of everybody else. And I think it's a real danger to democracy. We're really headed towards, if not already, an oligarchy.
Okay, but back up though. So
yes,
you are writing this book largely in response to the obsession with race and Black people over the last 6, 7 or so years. I mean, American culture has often been, maybe always, obsessed with race, but in the last 6, 7 years, especially so. And so every corporation has Black people on its website now, and Black Lives Matter banners everywhere in every storefront. Every skyscraper has some mention of Black Lives Matter. Now you say that the problem with the press is that it is not speaking for the working class in any way. Well, but aren't they, by talking about Black people who get killed by the cops? I mean, that's the working class, the poor, that's the bottom of society, is it not?
This is such a good question. I'm so glad you asked this. So first of all, the data shows that police insult Black people more. They lay hands on them more. Yeah. They push them up against cars more. They put them in handcuffs more, and they beat them up more.
Yeah.
The one thing they don't do more of disproportionately somehow
is kill them.
It's kill them. For some reason, when they reach for the gun, right before they pull the trigger, that racism, whatever makes them insult Black people more, which is a freaking moral emergency, just the insulting, whatever it is, they don't shoot them more, right? So a press that was doing its job, that
when you control for all other factors, right?
Exactly, for poverty, exactly, yes.
And the violence of the suspect. I mean, whether the suspects whether they have a gun, what they're doing with the gun, et cetera, right? If you control for all those things, Roland Fryer has shown through many studies that cops are actually less likely to pull the trigger against a Black perpetrator than against a white suspect. So anyway, yep.
So exactly. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
Thanks for making me sound much more credible. So a press that was doing its job, if the New York Times every day had an op-ed that said the same op-ed, we're in a moral crisis. A Black person who needs help, who reaches out to the police, can be very certain that they will be insulted, much more so than a white person. Like I would have, that's not woke to say that. That is a moral emergency that every American should be shouting that from the rooftops. Sure. Instead, what we get is op-ed after op-ed saying that there is a genocide against Black people, that Black men can't leave their house without fear of being shot. We get an obsession with white supremacy, as if America still is a white supremacy. And we get op-eds calling for defunding the police, a view that is opposed by 81% of Black people, a view that would harm poor and working class Black people more than anybody else, which is something they know, right? Like They know this, which is why they don't support it. That's wokeness. It is not woke. President Trump, when he released 5,000 Black men from prison with the First Step Act, he wasn't being woke. He was being a good American. Okay. Sorry. I hate to say nice things about him, but I'm sorry. That was extremely important. 5,000 Black men that Joe Biden probably put in prison. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not woke. We have a mass incarceration problem. And by the way, Republicans have been at the forefront of prisoner releases for the last decade in Georgia and Idaho and Iowa. Okay. This is not, so this is, they are way ahead of us. Okay. So instead of realizing that we now all agree that we have these remaining problems of race that impact Black people more than anybody else, we have abandoned the descendants of slaves again and again. They still live with intergenerational poverty at 30% in neighborhoods we wouldn't dream of walking into, moral emergencies. Instead of focusing on this, we focus on things that are totally at the symbolic level, that cost white liberals nothing to fix, that flatters their vanity, and that is actually a tax on the poor and the working class. I'm thinking about issues like immigration, right? Mass immigration, which is something that has become, considered, if you oppose that, you're now considered racist, right? The mission creep of what counts as racism, when actually mass immigration has been linked to a 40% decline in Black wages over the last 30 years, right? Literally, the people you are claiming to advocate on behalf of are paying the price for these things that are literally lining your pockets, right? Who benefits from mass immigration? It's affluent liberals, where both people have these, very demanding jobs, and they need a nanny and they need domestic labor. They need somebody in the house doing these chores for them, right? It's things like that. That's what I mean when I say woke media. You're absolutely right. I do not think that we should for a minute think about the working class as being uniformly white. The opposite. We do still struggle with issues of racism. The working class is extremely, extremely diverse, but it is also much less polarized about the stupid issues that we talk about. Working class Americans across the board, irrespective of who they vote for, tend to be much more conservative. They're not sitting there fighting with each other. They're actually uniting at, workers' strikes at, John Deere and the Kellogg's factory. These are full of people who vote Democrat and vote Republican. All of this political polarization around race is just a way of hiding class solidarity among elites. That's the argument. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about you.
No. Well, I just want to do the mass immigration thing real quick, because that's an issue. I want to get clear on that in my own head. And I think a lot of the listeners have heard me talk about this kind of briefly. I just always say I'm an open borders guy. I'm an open borders guy. Okay, what does that mean? I am still an open borders guy. I am for the elimination of the whole apparatus that guards the border. I'm basically for the abolition of borders.
Awesome. This is going to be so fun.
So yeah. So here's the thing. So in the aggregate, right? I think it's indisputable that migration across borders is good for humanity. I mean, if you believe in, if you want material wealth, if you want material progress, I think it's indisputable. Economists have shown this. Now, hang on. In the aggregate, for the 8 billion as a whole, right? I think it's good. But of course, certain people in certain occupations living in certain places in the world will be absolutely adversely affected by immigration. Of course they will. Like, for instance, working class, and Steve Bannon says this every day, working class Hispanics along the border, working class African Americans along the border, working class white people, all the working class people along the border. Of course, if you're trying to get a job in the lower levels of our economy, you're going to be competing with immigrants. That is just a fact. So those people are going to have worse lives. But then again, when they go to shop at places, and they will see, the benefits of the general immigration. But overall, though, of course, it's good for people. But for particular people in particular positions, often they are brown and Black, it's a bad thing. So I am agreeing with your argument there. I just wanted to refine it a bit, if that's okay.
Yes. Okay. I think that's a great point to make. Yes. Overall, GDP has risen in America as a result, in the aggregate, as a result of mass immigration, but people do not live in the aggregate. And I'm sorry, I don't need my GDP to go up. I'm doing fine. The people who need their GDP to go up are the people who are committing suicide and deaths of despair because they have no future in this country as a working class person. And so I thank you for refining. I really appreciate that. I feel also that there's a sort of civil rights argument to be made that, as a Jewish person, like, in living memory of a time when we were, when civil rights were literally taken away, which leads directly to genocide. I think without a national border, you don't have civil rights. I mean, I don't believe human rights exist. I don't believe, because a right is a contract you make with a government. It's not just a thing we think people should have. Like, we don't have inalienable rights. That's a fiction. That's an aspirational fiction. There's no such thing as an inalienable right, because slavery exists, right? Like, people can have their liberty taken away from them. And the only thing that protects our rights is a government that we make a contract with to defend those rights in exchange for being voted in. And the minute you say that the national border is porous, you are devaluing the only protection that Black Americans have that is not even good enough, right? It's not even good enough. We have never ensured them full civil rights. But before even getting there, we're saying we're going to devalue the difference between citizen and non-citizen. So, for example, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez once tweeted something like, the whole history of citizenship in America is bound up with racism, essentially saying like citizenship is racist, right? And to me, it's the opposite. There's no way to fight racism. There's no way to fight discrimination without civil rights. And there's no such thing as a civil right if you don't have a national border. And the idea that there should be people who come in, who live amongst us, who are not citizens, that's terrible too, right? I don't want to live next to somebody who doesn't have protection of the law. I don't want to get into a fight with somebody and then I go to one court and they get deported. That's not good. That's terrible. So there's just so many ways in which this idea of like mass immigration, open borders is so dangerous, in addition to just the idea that, yes, poor people can buy an iPhone now for cheaper because that manufacturing job was sent to China. But what are they going to do? Sit at home and be unemployed on an iPhone? Like, you don't get dignity from an iPhone. You get dignity from good work, good jobs. And I think so. It's just the perfect example of how like affluent liberals, drunk on their own virtue of let's rescue, the poor from other countries, have totally abandoned the people that we owe the most to, which is our own poor, our own working class, our own civil rights.
If you know anything about my ideas or this show, you know that we stand for sexual freedom, sexual pleasure, and the confidence to attain it. So I am thrilled that Blue Chew is the newest sponsor of the Unregistered podcast. A lot of people don't know what Blue Chew is. It's a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable tablets, and at a fraction of the cost. You can take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever the opportunity arises. The process is simple. You just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part? It's all done online. So no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. Guys, there's nothing better than sexual confidence, and Blue Chew can help give you the confidence where it counts. So, if you could benefit from extra confidence when it's time to perform, Blue Chew can help. And we've got a special deal for the listeners of Unregistered. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code UNREGISTERED at checkout. Just pay $5 in shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code UNREGISTERED to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring this podcast. I'm reeling from what you said about rights and the nation state, because that challenges really the core of my politics. I am maybe first of all an anti-nationalist, maybe.
Okay, now it's getting interesting.
And your argument that the nation state is the only thing that can protect our rights, which I totally agree with you. They're fictions, they're constructs, of course, but they become real, of course. That only the nation state can adequately protect those rights for us. I mean, we don't have time to go into that now, but I just want to mark that as something that I'm thinking about as you're talking. But I also was thinking about
You're very identified as Jewish. That's very much part. You used to be the editor for the Forward, or one of the editors for the Forward.
Opinion editor.
Opinion editor for the Forward, which is
yeah.
the most famous Jewish American newspaper.
Yes. Socialist.
Yes, right. Left wing Jewish. Yeah, very famous. 100 years old, about something like that. Anyway, so yeah, and I'm thinking as you were talking about that also, I'm like, well, of course, the Jewish story, right? I mean, that is the prime illustration of this. People without a nation state for millennia, who, as we all know, were persecuted by all sorts of people all over the world. Right. As they wandered from nation to nation without their own nation, they got persecuted until, the story goes, with some justification, they had their own nation in 1948. That's a solid argument that I'm going to be dealing with going forward. This has nothing to do with your book, really, but or it's tangential anyway. Here's, to me, the argument in your book that I think it's all provocative and brilliant, but this sentence right here, it sums up a major argument in your book that's gonna get you disinvited from a lot of parties. Okay.
Oh no.
Which is this. You know what I'm talking about. Wokeness perpetuates the economic interests of affluent white liberals. It perpetuates the economic interests of Batya. You're saying that by writing an article about how Derek Chauvin choked to death George Floyd on the street, that's advancing the interests of white wealthy people in New York City? What?
No, God forbid. No. It's again, it's not woke to believe that Derek Chauvin is a racist murderer who got what he deserved, you know?
Well, that's actually debatable, but I mean, yeah. I mean, well, how do you know he's racist?
Oh, well, I mean, in the trial, things came up where it became very clear that he had a pattern with Black men. No, don't you?
It wasn't clear that he was racist. I mean, I think it was sort of clear that he had several altercations with people who were Black, but there was no evidence of his ideas, right? Of what he thinks about race or Black people.
Evidence of things he had said that were very demeaning and
Okay.
I mean, he didn't use the N-word or anything, but it seemed pretty clear that he did not recognize George Floyd's humanity.
Damn near everybody agrees that we don't want cops with their knees on the backs of people's necks and then them dying, right? And whatever else. I mean, we all agree on that stuff. So
that's not woke. Yeah.
So it was okay, you're saying, for the New York Times to report on that, but what was not okay? How does it advance the interests of some wealthy guy who went to Brown University, who's now a reporter for the New York Times, to talk about how Black people are oppressed in this country? Why does that help him?
Well, again, it depends what you mean by oppressed. Like, so pointing out things that are real, you know, like that's really important. You rarely see that. You rarely see journalists, you know, going to Baltimore and reporting on the fact that 40% of children have a 1.0 GPA, right? Like that is an extremely important story that nobody is reporting on, right? You don't see people reporting on just the fact that, you know, Black people are more likely to be insulted by the cops. You don't see people reporting on, you know, working class conditions and what people actually want from the workplace, what they're actually looking for, you know, the disenfranchisement at the economic level of working class workers of all races. What you do see is things like article after article in the New York Times calling for defunding the police. You see article after article calling for you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars for children. You see article after article demanding open borders. You see, you know, people calling standardized testing white supremacy. People calling climate activism, if you oppose like the most extreme versions of climate activism, you're a white supremacist. You know, like it's in some ways, like immigration, it literally is lining the pockets of affluent liberals, I believe. You know, they are the ones whose GDP has gone up from mass immigration. But on these other topics, it's just a grand distraction from the actual inequality in America that affects Black and Latino Americans more than anybody else, right? It is a grand distraction exercise to where instead of talking about why does the economy reward people with an elite college degree so much today, and why does it reward the working class, the backbone of this country, so poorly, instead of talking about that, instead of talking about the inequality that has risen up our class so very high above our fellow Americans, we're instead talking about this, inequality in a way that we're not even talking about the actual racial inequality. We're inventing things like climate racial injustice, that just flatters affluent liberals while allowing it's a defense of the status quo is essentially what I'm saying. And as such, it is perpetuating the inequality that we all, I think, need to be talking about.
Right.
Is that
okay.
satisfying?
Yeah. So in other words, there's been a lot of laws and policies, regulations over decades, maybe centuries, right, that have created the world we live in that has all sorts of inequalities that you don't like and other people don't like. And that has other features to it that none of us like, I mean, who likes the fact that every city in this country still has a ghetto in it that looks essentially the same as it did when I was a kid in the 1970s, right? It hasn't really changed. Yeah. So, but
of course, I mean, obviously the people,
Now, yeah, I'm sorry. So all those policies and laws have flowed, of course, from the top of society, right? That's who writes the laws. Everyone knows that. And the people who wrote the laws overwhelmingly all went to the same colleges. They were all trained to think in the same places for centuries in this country, right? And the same people who become government policymakers, the institutions that train those people also train our journalists. They come from the same womb, don't they? Right? The same Harvard makes the journalists and it also makes the senators, both. And so if you look around and you don't like American culture and American society and the right and the left don't like it, well, you got to look at the people who created this. And it's the people who come from places like Harvard, which includes not just the senators and Congress people, but journalists. And so for journalists to say, oh, what we need above all else to be working on is the racism in the hearts of white people, right, of course, is an impossible task. What does that even mean? It will always be the case that there will be racism in the hearts of white people, rather than saying what you want them to say is, hey, let's look at the history of redlining and how we might correct that with different policies, or removing laws from the books that put 2.3 million people in prison, for instance, which is my thing. They talk about the racism in the hearts of men. When I'm looking at 2.3 million human beings in cages, about half of whom we would all agree shouldn't be there. Exactly. So I want to talk about releasing those people in a way that makes sense, rather than the racism that's in the hearts of people. I've been using Headspace for more than 6 years, and I'm grateful for it every day. I meditate with it, and I use the techniques and insights from it all day, every day. And I am so grateful that I can now offer the same free 1-month trial that got me started with Headspace to the listeners of Unregistered. 10 minutes with it, I guarantee you, will change the way you feel, will change your relationship with stress and anxiety, will help you sleep, and will make you more connected to the moment and less subject to the fears and anxieties associated with the past and the future. So again, go to headspace.com/renegade to get a free 1-month trial. Find some Headspace at headspace.com/renegade and get 1 month free of their entire meditation library. This is the best Headspace offer available. So go to headspace.com/renegade right now. That's headspace.com/renegade. And you were sort of spit out of the belly of that beast, right? I mean, yeah, completely. We both were. We both have PhDs from elite universities.
Right. Tell me a little bit about that, what that experience was like and how it shifted your view at all, or if you just were like, oh yeah, I kind of saw that coming, and how come you were not indoctrinated? What made you able to stay real and true to where you were actually a threat to that?
Well, you read my biography that I've written on my website, right? So you know some of this, but yeah, it was mid grad school, basically. I was at Columbia in grad school, work on my dissertation. And I just found that I wanted to write about competition among unions. I started out as a labor historian. Competition among unions is beneficial to the workers, to the union members, right? Because the unions compete against each other for their attention. And the entire academic establishment told me to not do that, that it was not okay politically. And during my dissertation defense, very famous historians only asked me about the politics of my dissertation and how it was wrong. And so that was when it started. But it was really about walking the streets of New York and then going into a classroom, walking the streets of New York, taking the subway, watching TV, listening to the radio, and then going into a classroom and thinking, these are radically different places. The people in the classroom look and act and think nothing like the people on the streets or on TV or in real life. And the main difference is that the people in the classrooms acted as if they were monks, right? There's this very ascetic kind of presentation that academics have. We're very, very polite. We don't curse. We don't show anything of our body or our bodily desires. We're anti-sensual, anti-sexual. We don't talk about those things. We are unaware of popular culture because that is unseemly and non-respectable, Batya. This is right from your book, right? And I like TV shows, and I like clothes, and I like how things taste and smell and feel, and I like, airplane rides, and I like stuff, bourgeois stuff, right? But the left-wing professors who raised me, I mean, my parents, they weren't professors, but may as well have been. And all the left-wing professors who raised me, they didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't like it. And not only that, they looked down on it. This is right about your book.
Right.
They look down on the choices, the preferences made by working class people every day, which is to watch TV and read things that these professors don't like, and watch TV shows that these professors really don't like, and go to Las Vegas for their vacation instead of to Paris.
Yeah.
Right? They should be going to Paris. I had a very famous women's historian, Alice Kessler Harris. I'll name her right here. Very famous, basically invented women's history in the United States. She said to me, women, I asked her about like the history of women sort of revolutionizing shopping and commercialism and like consumer revolution and making capitalism really accountable to the consumers, because women were immigrant women, a lot of Jewish immigrant women in particular were doing this at the turn of the 20th century. And she said, yeah, I wish they were doing different things with their time. I wish they were voting and marching and organizing and founding unions and whatever all these fantasies, these left-wing fantasies are. They hate shopping. They hate shopping. So I devoted an entire chapter in my book to shopping. And
That's so cool.
and how feminist and revolutionary it was, because it gave power to all these immigrant, poor, mostly women in the big cities. And they could now go and buy fashions from France, even though they worked in a factory. They could go flirt with boys in Coney Island away from their dad and their, whoever. So yeah, I started to see like working class culture, right, as a site of liberation for me personally. Yes. And I also revolutionary
against the sneering of the educated class,
and against Puritanism, which I hate the most, which is our founding creed in this country, right? I mean, we've had lots of ways in which Puritanism has been challenged, but it is still a core component here in our culture, and respectability that you talk about. And we didn't get into this. Your first couple of chapters I love, because you show this fight between the penny press, which is all about just pleasing the gratifications of the working class, right? Which is fine to me, right? And these new respectable upper class people in New York City didn't like this, and they wanted to basically ignore the interests and the desires of the working class and teach them how to behave, and teach them how to think, and teach them how to comport themselves in an advanced, industrial, democratic civilization. No, thank you. So they got rid of fun from the pages of the New York Times. No more fun, but a lot of moralizing and a lot of taste making. I've thought about how the New York Times, I love to this day, like I hate the New York Times, but I love the food section still. Right. And I love even though I disagree often, I love the movie reviews, and I love the jazz reviews. Right. But all of that, if you read those reviews, it's basically, they're telling you, and I was a Times reader for my whole life, they're telling you what's good, what's bad, what's tasteful, what's intelligent, what is not cool, what is cool. All the time, New York Times readers are being informed how to live their lives day to day, what iced tea to get, what neighborhood to live in, where to take your vacation, and most importantly, where not to. And where you don't go is where all the Trump people go, where all the white working class people go. That's what is to be avoided, boys and girls in our prep schools and our colleges, right? You don't do what they do. You go to the places the New York Times reviews. If you don't like jazz music, sorry.
Yeah,
how's that?
I mean,
that's the origin of
totally
my rebellion. Yeah.
It's the aspirational, it's and from the beginning, Ox understood that you could cater to the
founder
elites,
of the Times, the founder of the Times, Ox. Yes.
Even more powerful would be to cater to those who aspired to be to be that pathway that they could climb, the tastemaker, exactly like you said, to get them into those elites, I think you're exactly right. And but it's so funny because it's like it used to be, okay, you had the college degree that was enough to separate you. Now it has to be that elite college degree. Like as the funnel gets smaller and smaller, the people who are considered like the lame people, right? It gets bigger and bigger, right? It's not just the Trump voter, although that's like a big part of it, right? It's also even just your parents who are like suburban liberals, who you better make sure that your views don't look like theirs, even though they're on the right side of everything that you agree with them. It has to get even smaller and smaller and ever narrower and narrower, because you're right, it's completely aspirational. And I think the weird thing that happened was over the last 20 years, that cultural aspirational character turned very lucrative. And that was that was not supposed to happen. Like college professors and journalists were not supposed to be in the top 10%, as long as they were still making, a little bit more than cops, a little bit more than teachers, a little bit more than electricians, living in those same neighborhoods with them. Things were still kind of normal. Like you could still have a Republican open, a liberal outlet and understand the news and understand okay, they're not being insulted by it, let's say. But it was really that class divide when it turned lucrative, when the left became affluent, became a Brahmin left, as Thomas Piketty calls it.
Nice.
That's really when, and I think that most of our political polarization today is about class. It's really much more about class than it is about politics or about values or about certainly than it is about race. Okay, so let's get back to you. Okay, so you were raised by these people who were who were Puritan in their hatred of mass culture and enjoyment and the enjoyments of the flesh.
Yeah.
And that, do you think that, were you aware that this was anathema to you as a child? When did you realize this was that there was something off about this?
When I was shamed for wanting things, not so much my parents. My parents actually sort of understood this early on. They liked the good times. They liked the good stuff, so that's why they left socialism, actually. But, all their comrades, and then all the people I was hanging out with, I mean, the whole left raised me. I was only around left-wing people until I was in my 30s. But yeah, just a constant, being told that, wanting this car or that stereo or this shoe was not okay. And they never explained why it wasn't okay. And they also, but most of all, what I loved was working class people, poor people, were the ones who didn't seem to give a shit about being ostentatious, about showing off, their fancy Michael Jordan shoes, right? Or about showing off their fancy car but maybe they live in a project, but they have a really nice car. It's a very common thing among poor people, right? They don't seem to have any of these problems with the good life, right? And what do they think about rich people, right? Donald Trump was name checked maybe more than any other person before he was president in rap songs. Right. He was very, very popular.
No kidding.
Oh, look it up. There are hundreds, I think, rap songs that mention it, name check him positively. He was a hero for a lot of the Black working class, the urban youth, young working class. Sure.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, Michael Che has that great line. He's like, you white people, you hate your billionaires. We love our billionaires.
I know.
It's like that thing of class warfare is actually very alien to the working class. It's a very the top 10% who really hates that there's a 1%,
Well, it's the anti-materialism. It's the anti-materialism. It's the anti-consumerism that is only rich people. Only rich people hold those feelings about wealth and about pleasure and about material life and about consumer goods, all that stuff. It's only rich people.
Okay. Would you call yourself a lefty, or are you on the right, or do you say you're in the center, or where do you put yourself?
I'm pretty sure I'm a domestic terrorist, but I don't know.
Oh, no.
Either that or I'm human capital. I'm trying to figure out which it is these days, but I am just my own man. I don't know what to tell you. I come from the left. I have a lot of those sort of sensibilities, I guess I would say, left-wing sensibilities. I am, in terms of policies, like if I were a congressperson, those politics, pretty straight libertarian. But that's only a small part of politics. So there's a bunch of politics where I'm very lefty, very feminist in the original sense, very sort of, I'm a race radical in the original sense. I mean, I want to demolish race as a category, as an idea. You know, I think it's the most destructive idea ever invented, basically, certainly in this country. And so I'm mostly just opposed to things. I'm anti this, I'm anti that. I want to let people build their own worlds, though, right? I want to get institutions, the state, out of people's way and let them do what they want to do. So I'm not into prescribing how to do things, and I'm not into prescribing policies. I'm into like removing policies and removing laws mostly. Yeah. So I'm a little anarchistic also.
My husband's a libertarian, and I always say libertarians are wrong about everything, but they win all the arguments. It's very, very annoying.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we argue about it a lot, about economics.
I bet you do. That's really interesting. Okay. Good to know. How was it being on CNN? You just handed Brian Stelter his ass.
I feel so bad that people are saying that, because it was so cool that he had me on. Like, it was so, it was it was so unexpected. My book begins with a scene at CNN that's like rather scathing. And so I thought it was really amazing that he had me, and I'm really grateful. And so I feel bad that people think that and also CNN had been so much better than MSNBC that week. Like, it was clear that like they got the message, like, we've been messing up, and so I feel bad, but it was great. It was really cool that they had me, and it really helps get the message out. I think that this is not like that. This is a book for everybody. I really feel that.
Well, I want to know how on earth they invited you. How did they let that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Do you know why? What did they think your book said? Did they not read it? But everyone should go. Everyone should go. If you haven't seen it already, go look at Brian Stelter interviewing Batya a few days ago. It's pretty amazing. It's gone viral for sure on Twitter and elsewhere. So college. Let's finish with this, if you don't mind. College is the root of all evil, is it not?
I totally agree. And that's another one where I feel like the what passes for the socialist progressive left is like free college, or like, oh my God, $50,000 is student loan forgiveness, which makes me literally want to kill myself. Like, the party that used to be the party of like plumbers and linemen and factory workers is now asking them to pay off the student loans of like dentists and accountants. It's so infuriating. But yeah, when even someone like Bernie Sanders is out there saying free college, like free college is not a way to a strong working class. It's a way to no working class. It's just, it's so insulting to people who just don't have that. They don't want to go to school. They don't want a knowledge industry job. They want to work with their hands. They want to work with other people side by side. They want to build the things we need to exist, like, can you imagine if we had a war with China? China literally makes everything we need to survive. We've allowed everything we need to be made there. It's so bad. It's so dangerous. We've seen how much we rely on essential workers to get by, throughout the pandemic. And then instead of saying like, whoa, we really need to make sure these are dignified jobs that people can support families on, we oversaw the greatest wealth transfer in American history from the poor and the working class, and especially the middle class, to corporations. It's just so infuriating. And that was under Democratic leadership. And so I really don't, it's like, where do we go from there? When people start saying that, like, it's just, to me, that there's so much elite consolidation and elite class solidarity. And even the whole political fight that's going on in this country is a way of consolidating power among elites and acting like we have this big fight between left and right when 90% of people are being screwed over by both sides. And I know that sounds so like like, oh, both sides are the same, blah, blah, blah. But it's not even that. It's even worse than that because you look at someone like, Senator Josh Hawley, okay? He has this new bill that 50% of all products have to be made in America. I don't know if that's constitutional, but I love it, okay? Why is a Republican the one who's saying that? Why aren't the Democrats lining up to co-sign this bill that would reinvigorate the entire working class and create so many jobs? So what, we act like we have this political fight, but actually increasingly the Republicans are speaking for the working class. And that is a disaster for the Democrats. And instead of actually confronting that and being like, wait, what are we doing wrong here? They just call white supremacy, it's like, oh, it's white supremacy. It's like, that's not, even especially working class people of color see right through that. They don't want to hear that. They want good jobs,
Yeah, I am just amazed. So I taught in the elite universities for about 25 years, from the mid 90s until 2000, I don't know, about 3 years ago. So 5 to 10 years ago, until about 5 to 10 years ago, you didn't see or hear the word socialism in the media. Like, it wasn't mentioned. It wasn't mentioned. And I was a socialist, so I was always waiting for it. Right. And whenever like it snuck in, it was like this big news event for all socialists. We were, oh my God, on the news hour last night, did you hear they mentioned the word socialism? Not positively, but they mentioned it. And it wasn't a thing. It was not respectable at all. White supremacy was stuff that only like weird radical like Black Israelites in Times Square used to shout about, right? It wasn't a thing in the media, right? They didn't talk about systemic racism except in a few college seminars. But now all the stuff that you're writing about that happens, that is said on CNN or the New York Times or NPR, that all of it, right? All the wokeness, all the identity politics comes straight out of colleges and universities, from classrooms.
Straight from academia.
Professors invented all of it, right?
Wait, hold on. Until 5 years ago, you were socialist, and then you became libertarian over the last 5 years.
You're trying to bring it back to me again.
I really want to hear that. That's really interesting.
I identified as a socialist until like the late 90s.
So what changed?
Well, I told you. I mean, it's the asceticism of it that bugs me the most. Socialism requires asceticism because it requires discipline, because socialism is managing society, which is a humongous job. So if the working class is if we're all going to manage society, that's a lot of work, right? That's why Lenin and Trotsky and all the rest of them, all of them have all been about working class discipline, right? We got to work hard. We've got to wear uniforms now. They all wore uniforms, right?
And they would get so disappointed that all the working class wanted was lives that were like a little bit more bourgeois. Bingo. Exactly. Hence 1989 and 1991, when everybody walked away to go watch TV instead of being in the Soviet Union and go shopping in West Berlin. It's like, hello, thank you. Working in a steel factory in, Leningrad is like not so fun. But watching Dallas on TV turned out to be way more fun. So that's exactly why that whole regime fell. So yeah, I was a socialist, self-identified until about then. I was a huge Bernie fan most of my life. Sure. Oh yeah. So do you know enough about me? Do you want to ask more questions? I always want to ask more questions. So you basically abandoned socialism for Dallas, like for reality TV, right? I mean, I can't imagine anything cooler, by the way. That's like just the coolest thing I've heard all week.
Essentially, yeah. Like, yes. I mean, one of the great things about Renegade University and about this podcast is that the audience and the members of RU are like overwhelmingly what anyone would call working class. I mean, these are people who don't live in New York typically. They don't live in San Francisco. They have real jobs. They need to work to live, which is to me the definition of working class. People who must work in order to survive, and to have like working class intellectuals. Right. So guess what I had never seen before, Batya, at Columbia, at the New School, at all the places at Willamette, at Occidental, all the working class intellectuals. None. No working class people at all. Right. None. Even the Black people were all like, I mean, I remember like I had a Black kid in my college at Occidental, right? He was like the one Black kid. Oh, well, who was he? He was Jay Johnson's son, the head of Homeland Security. Are you kidding me? Like, that's the kind of, that's working class.
Okay. So wait, so tell me, what is the what is the difference between the students at the colleges you taught and your audience now? Like, what are the different views? Like, how are the working class intellectuals different? What are they thinking? Tell me
They're
about that.
self-trained. They're autodidacts mostly, right? So they've used the internet and podcasts and all the rest of it to educate themselves rather than watch kitten videos, number one.
Right.
Number two, they're, of course, 100% motivated to learn, to think, to question, to do all the things professors want in a class, right? Because that's why they're there. That's who they are. And they came to it on their own. They weren't told by any teacher or parent to go read Plato. They just came to it on their own. They want to do it. It's this natural curiosity, which, right, as academics, that's what we always wanted. When I teach at Renegade University, the entire classroom is nothing but people who have spent their lives reading and studying on their own, self-motivated, and who are all they want to do is talk about Plato. They're not there for the yoga classes. They're not there for the cafeteria. They're not there for the football games on Saturday.
Amazing.
They're there to talk about ideas. It's working class intellectuals, like Gramsci said.
Oh, cool.
There you go.
It's just so cool that you built that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
No, really, really.
But this is supposed to be about your book.
Yeah.
You've been talking about it a lot, I know.
Listen, I already know what's in my book, but I don't know what's in your head and your experiences. And
okay, so I'll let you ask one more question. Oh, but I was going to say, no, I mean, so it is actually all tied together because my career is basically a rebellion against what you're writing about very much. I mean, I wanted to be a journalist. I am a journalist, but I wanted to be a journalist originally. And I worked for the New York Times I worked for the New York Times Magazine for about a year. I had a gig with them.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Putting together.
So when was that? What year was that?
That was in the 90s. It was in
the 90s.
They had a big anniversary issue. I think it was the 150th anniversary of the New York Times Magazine. So I basically did all the work for that, all the research, and put it all together. So I was in that building a lot. I knew some of those people. Yeah, it's I read the New York Times cover to cover for 25, 30 years, basically. I mean, my entire coming of age was through the New York Times.
Same.
And now I can't read a news article without pain.
Yeah.
It's too much suffering. But Batya,
it's a lot of suffering.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for the questions. I don't often get asked questions. I appreciate that.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me, for your generosity, for inviting me on and sharing your audience with me. It's really an honor to speak to you and to speak to them. And I really hope we'll stay in touch.
Oh, wow. That's so nice. Thank you. Best of luck out there. You'll need it.
Thank you so much.
And it's a brilliant book. It's such a good book.
You're freaking me out.
It's a brilliant book, and you're going to have so many new fans because of it. You'll be more than fine. But it's a brilliant, wonderful book, and I'm really glad you wrote it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seriously, thank you. That means the world to me. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Bye, Batya.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I am Thaddeus Russell. To become a member of the Unregistered Underground Supporting Listeners Group, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.